As you know, the Meat Eater live tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in Meat Eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your guide to the whitetail woods. Presented by First Light, creating proven, versatile hunting apparel for the stand, saddle, or blind. First Light, go farther, stay longer. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this week on the show, we're diving into the wisdom-filled parenting philosophy that Clay Newcomb's leaned on as he's introduced his 4 children to the hunting lifestyle. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. And this week we are continuing our series on parenting outdoor kids, and specifically today spending a lot of time talking about introducing your children to hunting. And our guest today, as I mentioned at the top, is the one and only Clay Newcomb. If you are not familiar with Clay Newcomb, I don't know, you must have been living under a rock or something. Clay is one of my colleagues here at Meat Eater. He's the host of the Bear Grease podcast, host of the Bear Grease Roadshow on the Meat Eater YouTube channel, and I think one of our foremost thinkers, speakers, and storytellers within the hunting and outdoor community. He's just a wise man. He is full of intuitions and insights and ideas and fascinations that I think we all can learn from. And so today, that was my hope, is that we could get my friend Clay here to share a little bit of his experience in his journey as a dad and trying to introduce his kids and teach his kids about hunting and using hunting as an opportunity to grow young men and women. And he's had a lot of experience doing it. He has 4 children, 2 girls, 2 boys. And the oldest of which is 21. So he's been doing this for 21 years now. He has seen what has worked. He's seen what hasn't worked as well. He has lived it. He's learned it. He has a lot to share. And man, I just wrapped up this conversation with Clay. I think there are some really, really nice little gems here we can take away from this. We're going to learn some things about his philosophy. And I think that is an important takeaway, is that there isn't necessarily a one right answer to any of these questions about how to introduce your kids to hunting or fishing or the outdoors. There's no specific correct way to do any of these things. But if you can develop a philosophy, if you can develop a set of values or processes that you go through that will inform how you make these decisions, that will guide you as you go through life with your son or daughter and experience all that the natural world has to throw at you together. Having something to fall back on, a foundation, some set of ideas that help you make decisions throughout life, that's going to be helpful. And Clay shares with us his, and I think we can all borrow from it in part, maybe in whole, to help us on our own journeys as mothers, fathers, and as hunters. So that's our conversation today. It is fun, it's insightful, and actionable, I think would be the last way I would describe it. So with that out of the way, I don't think we need to belabor this anymore. I think we should just get to my chat with Clay. It's a good one, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, here with me now on the line, we have the one and only Clay Newcomb. Clay, thanks for being here.
Hey, Mark.
I appreciate
it, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you making time to do this. You are a busy man with a seemingly endless supply of Bear Grease episodes to record and all sorts of adventures. So thanks for clearing the schedule.
It's all hype, man. Don't tell anybody, but yeah, it's not hard. I just roll into work just whenever I want and don't travel much. It's easy, Mark. This is no big deal.
You know what? You're good at a lot of stuff, Clay, but lion is not one of them. Hey, what's the word on that country life? How's stuff going with that so far for Brent and you?
Oh man, I think it's going really well. So at the time we're recording, there's been 3 episodes of This Country Life which have come out, which are the host of that show is my good friend, your friend too, Mark, Brent Reeves. Brent's from Arkansas. Brent's kind of been on the Bear Grease crew since the beginning, not officially, but he's been involved in my podcast for a while and just a longtime friend. And so he now has a podcast. It's short. It's 20 minutes long. It's a monologue. It's kind of funny. Funny, folksy, teaches you a little bit, and just a real lighthearted little narrative about country living, man. And it's going good. We're getting a lot of good feedback on it, and it's on the Bear Grease feed, so it's like part of kind of the Bear Grease world, kind of like Foundations is for you and Tony.
Yep, exactly. So Brent had an episode talking about the different things in his pocket, right? Has that made you at all any more self-conscious about what's in your pocket, or have you started thinking about that a little more now that folks are probably asking you about that?
You know what, Brent, sometimes people in media might like exaggerate stuff that they do. Like, for example, they might talk about all the stuff they carry in their pocket, but really on any given day, they might not actually have that stuff. Brent, for real, for the last 40 years has literally carried all that stuff in his pocket. Anything you do with him, you can be like, hey, Brent, where's that Buckeye? And he's got the Buckeye, which is shocking to me. He always has his case knife. He always has his pocket watch. I mean, it's not a joke what he did. Me, Mark, man, any given day, it's a wild card what I've got in my pocket. Yeah, I don't have any routine, but I have been influenced by Brent, and I have been carrying a pocket knife, which honestly, to much people's surprise, maybe, I don't always have a knife on me, and I'm a little ashamed to say that, but it's just the truth. But I have been carrying a case trapper with me.
Nice.
Last month or two, because someone gave me one, and I've actually I really like it. So
I've been torn on the knife thing. I've always had this little keychain knife. It literally looks like a key, but it has a little tiny knife that folds out of it. So it's very handy to have, open a package or cut a small piece of rope or something in a pinch. But I've debated bringing an actual nice, bigger folding knife with me, and I'm always off and on about that. I'll carry it around sometimes, and it seems like bulky when you don't need it 90% of the time. But that 10% when you do, it's really nice to have that larger, more functional piece. So I don't know. You'll have to tell me what the report is after a few more months carrying yours.
What I've learned about carrying this pocket knife I've been carrying is it's almost like just having something to do with your hands. Like I'm holding it right now. Not even, I think I was holding it before we even started talking about this. Like I just kind of fiddle with it all day, and I'm just conscious of it. And it's almost like you just use it like not as a functional knife, but as just like something to fiddle with. That's bad. Maybe this is not a good crutch, but
hey,
I don't know.
It could be better than some things. I used to spin my cell phone as like a fidget thing. I would just spin it in my fingers, and that led to me dropping it and having some damage several times. So knife is a better option. On the topic at hand, though, other than what's in our pocket, Clay, as you know, I'm doing this series about parenting, outdoor kids, talking about, we spend so much time on this podcast talking about how to hunt deer, how to kill deer, how to pattern deer, how to do all this kind of stuff. And we like to obsess over all that. But I frequently think, why don't we, I shouldn't say that. I don't frequently think this. I think about this sometimes and tell myself I should be thinking about it more often, which is, how come we don't spend as much time debating and discussing how to get our kids and teach our kids about this stuff, why don't we spend as much time doing that as we do obsessing over where's this big buck going to be tomorrow, or how old is this buck, or what pinch point will be the right one. So that's all to say. I wanted to give it some attention because I'm assuming you would say this would be true for you too, that as a parent, once you do become a father or a mother, it totally changes your priorities. It totally changes everything about how you experience the outdoors. But a lot of times we just kind of go along with the flow and we figure stuff out, and we don't actually explicitly talk about this with other people. Like, how do you do this? Or how do you do it right? Or how do you do it wrong? Or what are some lessons we can learn? And I don't know if that's just because everyone's experiencing it, and so we don't feel like we need to talk about it, or if maybe it's because there's no real way to claim expertise on the topic. I don't know what it is, but I mean, tell me this, Clay. Would you consider yourself an expert on teaching your kids how to hunt or fish or be outdoors people?
No, I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that it's a categorization that could be labeled expert or not expert, because it's such a complicated thing, because we're always, well, let me step back. I think it is good for us to talk about this stuff and for every parent to think about it consciously, because anything we don't think about consciously, don't discuss, don't have some philosophy, and even more than a plan, it's a philosophy. And that's different. Like a plan is like, a plan is more external. Like we're going to do this, this, and this. A philosophy is an ideology of why we're doing what we're doing. And so if you don't have a plan and a philosophy, then you fall back to your default, which every one of us has a default way that we deal with our kids, which is often very flawed. And the thing about parenthood, and Mark, you're a parent, I'm a parent, and we were both parented by parents, is that anybody on planet Earth can look back and see the places where their parents got stuff right, but also the places where their parents got stuff wrong. And the idea is that you would be able to empathetically look back to your parents, what they did, and be like, you know what, I'm going to do something different. They tried hard, most of the time. In general, most parents are trying pretty hard. Some aren't. And you can say, I'm going to do something different than they did, and then I'm going to take the good things and replicate that. But if you're unconscious of that, you just can replicate negative patterns. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think we got to take this serious. And I think there's some kind of tropes out there about how to introduce kids to the outdoors that are just not that productive. And yeah, we can talk about those things for sure.
Yeah, we definitely do. I love that point you make about how, I think parenting can be based on a philosophy, not necessarily like a set of steps or a strategy, but a philosophy that you can always fall back on. Or I got to believe that is also informed by like a value system, right? There's all these things that come down the line that maybe we haven't experienced before, but we have a philosophy or a set of values that we can lean on to guide us, to help us make those new decisions, or, kind of weather this unfamiliar territory. So yeah, I want to get into what your philosophy is, what some of those negative tropes are. But before that, I want to first get a little more context. I'd like to personally even just better understand a little bit of how your early years built you to who you are and led to the parent that you are now. You mentioned this idea that a lot of us, for some of us, it's the only real training we had in parenting is just looking back on how we were parented, right? As you just mentioned, and probably for all of us, we can think of good and we can think of bad. What do you remember about your childhood, Clay, as your, what those early years were like when your dad or other family members or friends were helping introduce you to hunting and the outdoors? What stands out as being those formative experiences or lessons? So I can talk pretty freely about this because I've talked very freely about it with my dad, who everybody in the bear grease world knows because he's on my podcast a lot. I have a great relationship with my dad, and
And I was born in 79. So I grew up in the 80s, as a adolescent and teenager in the 90s. And the idea of introducing kids into the outdoors, the philosophy of the age was very different back then. And the philosophy was there was very little coddling. There was very little actually trying to make an experience pleasant for a kid. It was more just like, hey, if you're going to go hunting with me, this is the way it's going to go. And this is the way it's going to be done. And it wasn't like our dads were jerks. Like my dad, he worked a regular job and could only hunt on the weekends and didn't hunt very much on Sunday. So he kind of had like one day a week to hunt. And he was a very serious bow hunter for what he had. And so, man, he wasn't going to let much get in the way of him doing what he needed to do to kill a deer, during the bow season on public land in Arkansas. And so I had to just kind of get with the program, and both of my brothers didn't really like that program too much. And I think Dad would say, he was probably pretty hard to deal with back in those days. I mean, he just wasn't very accommodating. And honestly, I don't know that either of my brothers would have ever been that interested in it. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit later when I talk about, I don't think all of our kids have to be hunters, nor do they want to be hunters.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if he'd have done stuff different, if the results would have been any different, because I have two brothers that hunting is not a big part of their lives. They both have hunted, and one of them's kind of getting back into it. But no, my first memory of bow hunting was the first time my dad actually took me out to hunt, and I had a bow. I was in the 4th grade, had been shooting, could pull 40 pounds, was legal to hunt. Dad took me out and put me in a tree stand way before daylight. And he puts me in this tree stand. It's like, man, I'll be back at 10 o'clock. And it is black dark.
And how old are you?
He's going I was in the 4th grade, so I would have been, I think, 9 years old. And he's not like going like 100 yards down the ridge. He's getting in his truck and driving, miles to some other place. And I got scared to death and just started crying. I mean, straight up crying. And it was a terrible experience. And he ended up taking me down and just kind of like leaving me in the truck while he went and hunted. And it was very traumatic for me. But I kept hunting with him, and he did accommodate me a lot after that. But it was a negative experience. And so anyway, I think a lot of guys my age, your age, would probably have fairly similar experiences of dads that were just pretty hardcore,
Yeah. So I love these stories of your childhood with your dad. I like to joke about how me and Gary would have got along real well when it came to deer hunting, because we were on the same program in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But you told me when I was down there hunting with you guys a couple of years ago, and I was talking with your dad, you had told me some of this, and you talked about kind of your dad's attention to detail and obsessiveness with things like scent control and really like having a detailed deer hunting program, and how his obsessiveness on that side of things actually drove you away from that style of hunting and that seriousness. Can you expand on that a little bit how like these experiences you had early on shaped who you then became as a hunter?
Well, yeah. So my dad, his philosophy, just to sum it up, would be to control the things that you can control to the T. And he grew up in the, yeah. and actually that's my philosophy too. It's my emphasis is in a different place.
Yeah.
And so he grew up, he in the 90s kind of came of age and became a really good deer hunter for our area and for what he had. And a lot of that revolved around scent control. And so he just was like hyper meticulous about scent control. And he was kind of a gear guy. He loved gear. He loved tweaking on tree stands. My earliest memories of bow hunting are being out in our yard at our lighted outdoor archery range, shooting our bows at like 11 o'clock at night, trying to get dialed in to go hunt the next day. And it's not like we waited till the last minute. It just 30 years ago, bows were just different than they are now. I mean, you just had to shoot all the time to stay consistent. And anyway, Dad loved tweaking on gear. And so that made me be ultra simplistic in my gear. Like if you sit down and meet with me and start talking about deer hunting, the last thing I'm interested in is gear. People are like, well, what kind of setup do you have? And I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, I do know. I mean, I'm very proficient in the woods, so I've got some fundamental understanding of gear, and but it's not what I get excited about. I don't get excited about tinkering with bows, and I don't get excited about all this kind of, in my mind, the man-made side of deer hunting and hunting. Mm-hmm. I get very excited about being in the woods, hunting, strategy in the woods, and so I wouldn't say, I certainly wouldn't say I'm any less serious. I mean, in some ways I'm more serious than my dad, but my focus was in a different place. And absolutely it came from his obsession with it. And it's funny because my son, Clay Newcomb, who's become a really good deer hunter himself, he's kind of gone the other way back toward, like, he talks to his grandpa and is like, man, Grandpa, I think you got this figured out. I think my dad's kind of light on the details when it comes to some of this stuff. So, it's like this pendulum swing, but I think generationally we learn, and there's a whole lot of stuff that I absolutely are fundamental to who I am and how I bow hunt that came from Clay Newcomb, Yeah.
So to overgeneralize, and correct me if I'm overgeneralizing this too much, but if I were to say what were some of the things that didn't work so well for you, it was maybe, being pushed into your dad's way of doing things too much, to too much of a degree, and maybe sooner than you were ready. Would you say, if you had to kind of really simplify some of the challenges of Gary's approach that kind of shaped you for better or for worse on that side of things, that was the challenge? Was maybe that side of things?
Well, I'm not entirely sure I understand fully what you're saying there. I didn't kind of develop my own world until I was grown. Like, I did everything he asked me to do and wanted me to do. And that's the only reason I was successful when I was young, was because I went with his plan. But then when I started hunting on my own and moved away, I was like, I could do things a little different.
Yeah. Let me rephrase that question, Clay, real quick. If you were to look back on your childhood and the way your dad introduced you to these things, if you had to point your finger at what worked and what didn't work, could you point me at a couple things on each, or one on each side of that?
Well, I don't want to say that what he was doing didn't work, and maybe I'm still not understanding your question, Mike, because his system worked great for him, and it was more just about how we wanted to hunt that was a little different. So I'm still not. I mean, like, the difference in us today would be primarily the way we handle scent control. Is that kind of what you're leaning towards?
More so, what worked for you as a kid when you were learning to hunt and learning to be an outdoorsman, and your dad was trying to teach you these things, or whoever else you were hanging out with that was teaching you about these things and bringing you in. I'm curious, like, what were the things that seemed to connect with you? Like, what got you into the outdoors? What were the things that your dad did that made you be like, man, I do want to be a hunter. Man, I love this. This is how I learned some stuff. And then what were some of those things that Gary did or didn't do that made you think, like, I don't really want to go out and do this, or this was traumatic? Yeah. Are there examples of that from a parenting perspective?
Well, I would say the dominating theme of my childhood with my dad was very positive. I mean, he was very excited about deer hunting. He portrayed it to me in a very appealing way. The way he talked about it, the way he dealt with it, it was clear to me that this is something that was that he highly valued. And so I wanted to highly value it. And I would say that's probably the, well, and aside from just the excitement of killing deer with a bow when I was young in our area, very few kids were, I mean, for real, I was probably the only kid in my grade that was killing deer with a bow consistently in high school and stuff. And there was a lot of accolades that came from that and satisfaction. And it was all just because my dad was putting me on deer, and we weren't we were hunting public land. It wasn't like we were hunting over feet. Nobody was hunting over feeders back then. And so, yeah, he did a fantastic job of portraying this lifestyle and just the camaraderie he had with his friends. All that was great. And I can't really point to anything he did wrong other than just, for real, I don't know that he did it wrong. It just was what he had to deal with. I remember one time on Saturdays, if we went with him, we hunted pretty far away from our house. And so if you were committed to go, you had to hunt all day. And I remember one day I wanted to come back to some kind of school get together in the afternoon. And so I went with him that morning, and then I was like, "Hey, Dad, can I go home?" Which meant he would have to go home. And he took me home. I remember it was kind of like, "What? You want to go home?" But he accommodated me on that. I remember that, which would have been hard for him because he had to skip out. So
yeah,
he did a lot of stuff right. I don't know if that answers your question, Mark.
No, that does. That does. Is there anything, now that you're a dad yourself and you've been one for 21 years, is there anything that you can point directly back to your dad as something that you've carried forward with your own kids? So something your dad did with you that when you became a father, you were like, "Man, I got to do the same thing with my boys or my daughters when I'm teaching them to hunt or bringing them outside or whatever it is."
He was very intentional with teaching us what was going on. Like he wouldn't. I still see like competent fathers doing this kind of stuff today. Is just like taking a kid out and just putting him in a tree and letting him hunt without teaching him. I had friends that I went to school with whose dads did that, and they killed deer, with rifles and stuff. And me and that kid would go out in the woods, and they would have no clue really what was going on in deer hunting. And I would be like, "Man, we got to find some tracks and trails and scrapes and rubs and funnels and pinch points." And I would just be like talking a different language because Dad trained me that way. So really teaching your kid to be a woodsman. And that's what I have really tried to do. And haven't some kids are going to be very receptive to that and others less receptive, but giving them, he gave me the tools that I needed to be a successful hunter and trained me. He trained me, very intentionally as a young kid. And I've tried to do that.
Yeah. Do you feel like, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but do you feel like your father took the same approach with your two brothers and it was just that they were just different personality types, so they weren't receptive? Or was there something else that led to them just not connecting with this lifestyle the way it has for you?
Yeah, I think he did. I think he would have had the same approach with them. They just kind of had less interest from the beginning, I feel like. Okay. They did. And he and that kind of goes into one of my points, Mark, is that every kid is different, and so you to give them all a chance, you kind of got to have a different strategy with each of them. And I think he did have the same strategy with all of us, like exactly the same. And so, and I just had a natural tendency to lean into all this stuff. And my other brothers, they just didn't as much. And that's what I've seen with my kids is the way I treat Clay Newcomb, who he's now 17 and really is a competent hunter. You could just turn him out of the truck just about anywhere and say, "Hey, go kill an elk, go kill a bear, go kill a deer." And I feel like he'd have a pretty good chance. He just understands what's going on. And I'm much harder on him. I'm just very different with him than I am the other kids that are also hunters, but just aren't as interested as Bear is. And I would be a little more accommodating to them. I would not be as aggressive in planning with them, and so that goes to that. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is just like every kid's different and you got to treat them different.
Is it a situation in your experience with your kids where you try to introduce them in the same way and then see how they react to it, and then you say, okay, these two are on board with this, but these two, it seems like it's going to be different, so I'm going to have to change my approach? Or how do you, I guess what I'm getting at here, Clay, is what has been your experience trying to assess each of your children and their interest and how they're ready for the next thing, or how interested or not interested they are, and how much pushing or training or I don't know. What's that been like for you?
Okay. I think that there are sectors of a child's development up until they're 18 years old when the parental influence is different at different times. From 0 to about 8 years old, Mark, I didn't let my kids make very many decisions. I made decisions for them, and I would be, and this isn't dogmatic. I didn't do this every time, but to generalize, I decided when the kids went hunting with me and when they didn't. So it wasn't like, hey, do you want to wake up and go deer hunting in the morning? Ask a 7-year-old. I didn't get, they're not ready to make that choice. I would say, hey, we're going deer hunting in the morning. I'll wake up. We're going to have some breakfast. We're going to go out. We're going to have a good time. We're going to do this. And I would basically interpret for them what they needed to be doing to give them the exposure that they needed. And then from about 8 to 14, you start giving them some more choices because their preferences have begun to be formed, and you don't want to oppress them, but also they're not fully making choices on their own. But that's when you might be like, hey, we're going to go fishing over here. Would you like to come, or would you like to, go do X activity? And, you give them a little bit more choice. There are times when you would just be like, hey, we're going hunting in the morning. This is the way it's going to go down. And you just make them do it. And then, by the time they're about 14, 15 to 18, there's a lot more choice with them. Son, do you want to go deer hunting in the morning? If you do, you need to be up, you need to be ready. And so I think our hunting is a great place to implement some of these just responsibility things that the kids are going to have to deal with in life. So I would say, and then in each sector of that, you're evaluating, does this kid enjoy this? Do you think they're going to grow up and want to do this? And my 2 boys are pretty different. Bear is just naturally just interested, wanting to learn. My second son, he loves to go. He's less interested in the details, and I think he'll come back to hunting, and it'll be a big part of his life someday. I really do. I asked him the other day. I said, Shepherd, how many deer have you killed? And he said he killed 11 deer, and he's killed 2 bears. He's coon hunted with me a lot, but it's not the driver of his life, Mm-hmm. And you just kind of perceive that. So I treat Shepherd different than I do Bear.
As you know, the Meat Eater Live Tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in meat eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.
What about differences between your boys and your girls? You've got two of each. Is there any noticeable difference in this approach you've taken between the two genders? Or is it just like child by child? They're all different in their own ways, regardless of if they're boys or girls.
I would say it leans toward the latter of what you just said. My oldest daughter hunted with me when she was young. She liked turkey hunting. She's killed deer and turkey, but she was just from the very beginning, I just knew she wasn't going to probably be a real active hunter. We could just tell that, she just wasn't that interested in it. My second daughter was very interested in it. And until she was about 15, I would say she was probably the toughest hunter of all the kids. Like if I was going on a difficult hunt that wasn't going to be much fun, but wanted to take one of the kids, I would have taken River. And she's still very interested in hunting. She moved off to go to college, and so she hadn't hunted much the last couple of years. But I tried to treat them the same for the most part. Unfortunately, as they've gotten older, it is a little different with girls. And somebody could get mad at me for saying this, but I'm a little less comfortable with my girls going out on public land. My girl going out on public land by herself doing stuff. I just am. It's just the nature of the world we live in. And I've run into that because at times there's been times in the past when River is like, "Hey, I'm going to go out and do this." And I'm like, "Well, okay, let me think about that, River." Yeah. Where I absolutely would let my son do it. And that's just the truth of it. Yeah. And it's an issue of safety and an issue of context. River at times has wanted to take the dogs out coon hunting at night by herself on public land. Wow. And I've had to just be like, "River, you can't. If Bear will go with you, y'all can go." And I think that's okay to acknowledge that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Is there anything else you found over the years with your two girls? Well, I guess you wouldn't have known until you had boys afterwards, but were there any other things that had to shift with your approach with the girls versus the boys? Or when you started going through these experiences with your boys, you realized, "Oh, wow, I can do it totally different now." And that being because your two boys are both younger than your two girls, right?
That's right. Yeah. 2 older girls and 2 younger boys.
Yeah. So were there any other things where you realized like this does require fundamentally different touch or set of, ideas, or could you apply the same general philosophy across all 4?
I think they were the same, Mark. I really do. I didn't treat the girls much different than the boys. I really didn't. I just tried to teach them. I did everything about the same. I really did.
Yeah, that's one thing that I don't regret at all, but I only have boys, so I'll never know what that is like or what differences may or may not be there.
Come on, Mark, you're not quitting on us, are you?
Oh, I'm 100% quitting, Clay. I try not to be a quitter, man. But this is one phase in life where I am signed, sealed, and dotted, delivered. I'm done.
Okay. There can be surprises. I mean, I don't know the details of all the medical procedures, but stuff happens, man.
Yeah, we'll be having some stern conversations with the doctor if that ends up being the case. Clay, you hit on something a second ago, though, that I want to dive into more because it's one of the big questions that I found myself wrestling with just in these first, 5 years of being a dad. And everyone I've talked to so far on this topic, I've brought it up to. And that is this idea that you discussed kind of early on with your children, how, hunting can be this opportunity to teach important lessons like responsibility and toughness. And so as you described, when your kids were younger, in your mind, you were saying, man, they just need to get out and do this thing. They don't necessarily know why or how, but I'm gonna tell them, hey, we're going. We're gonna be out there at this time. We're doing this thing. So there's that approach. There's putting your kids out there to do these things and developing some toughness, some fortitude, developing some skills that will be important for them. That's one side of the hunting equation that I think hunting brings to the table for kids. There's this other side that a lot of folks talk about, which is, well, you got to keep it fun. You got to make sure they're enjoying the experience. You got to let them have some choice in the matter, because if they're not enjoying it, then you're going to push them out of this thing and they're not going to want to do it anymore. And so it seems like there's this balance between trying to make the experience fun and enjoyable for them so that they develop a passion themselves, versus using hunting as an opportunity to teach important life lessons. How have you thought about that dilemma or that balancing act? And how have you tried to approach that yourself?
Yeah, that's a complex and a good question. I think it all goes back to these age brackets of kids and how parents interact with kids during these particular seasons of life. My kids early on in their life, I was not full-time in the outdoor industry, so it's not like this was my job, but it was very much a lifestyle that I wanted to live. And so, and Misty wanted to live. I mean, our life revolved around us eating wild game, every day of the year, and being a family that loved nature and interacted with nature. And so my kids I would like to think that they just woke up one day and gained consciousness that not every kid in the world had to do what they did. It's just like if you live on a farm, you wake up and you do the work and you do the chores, and this is just my life. A farm kid doesn't have an option to be anything different. Mm-hmm. That's the way we kind of handled hunting, and not that it was like a job, but it's just like, yeah, it's what we do. It's like, and I made the one thing that, man, when your kids are as old as mine, Misty and I, Mark, almost, I would say weekly, if not 3 times a week, talk about the way we raised our kids and things we did right and things that we did wrong. And the one thing that we did right was for a decade plus, anywhere I went, unless it just absolutely I couldn't take a kid, which there was certainly hunts I didn't take kids on. But man, if I went to the grocery store, if I went to bid a landscape job, if I went to scout, if I went to do anything, man, I just was dragging those kids with me everywhere I went. Not for fun, just because they just needed to be with me. I wanted to talk to them. I wanted to teach them. I wanted to just have them be there, observing me being a human. And that exposure today, it's different, man. Like, kids have phones, and parents think the trend of the age is to think that kids have all these options and you'll damage them if you don't let them make choices. And boy, the biggest mistake that I feel like I see parents doing is reasoning with a 5-year-old or reasoning with a 4-year-old. You don't reason with them. You interpret life for them and let them know how things are going to go. And then as they get older and more mature, you begin to introduce choices and responsibility and all these things. I'm not answering your question directly, but basically hunting is just a platform to teach your kids about all kinds of stuff. And am I out there like saying, now, son, this is a life lesson. When the acorn falls from the tree, it becomes no, it's just like, get out there. And I mean, we got to work hard. We got to understand. I mean, it just, life happens, just even, hey, we're going hunting, go get the drink, son, put them in the truck, and then come back and get those ratchet straps out of the garage and put them in the truck. I mean, just the exercise of having a plan, doing it, acting on it. There's just lessons all over it,
Yeah.
And then the rare time when you actually kill an animal, yeah, that's when you can be strategic about implementing ideology of why we do this and taking care of the meat, and this is our food, and this is healthy and sustainable and good, and this is a celebration, and this is this is a pinnacle moment of our life, at an external level. So yeah.
I want to dive into two parts of what you just said there. But first, I want to explore an example of this whole toughness versus experience, or fun versus toughness kind of situation. And I want to see how you deal with this as an example. Let's say you were out there with one of your boys when they were, let's say, 6 or 7. So this is that first phase of that parenting child relationship you've described.
Right.
Let's say you're out on a hunt and you're sitting together somewhere and starts raining. And it's cold and it's windy and it's rainy, and you've been out there for a couple hours already and things haven't been going your way. But in your mind, let's say we're turkey hunting maybe. And you know that, man, if we stick it out till 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, there'll be that second wave of gobblers starting to cruise through, and it could pick up. So in this situation, your son is cold and he's sick and tired of it. And he says, Dad, I want to go home. This is kind of miserable. In your mind, would you say, all right, he's not having fun anymore, we should get out of here to keep this from becoming a miserable situation? Or would you say, nope, son, this is how it goes sometimes, and in your mind you're thinking, man, you're gonna be better for it because you're gonna learn how to deal with being uncomfortable, and we'll see how some perseverance leads to better things maybe if we stick it out? What would you do in that kind of situation?
It's totally subjective to what's going on in that kid's life. When Bear Newcomb he was probably 8 years old. It was opening day Arkansas bear season. I wanted him to be with me in the tree when I hunted, and we went in and sat for, I think I'm going to say 6 hours. It may have been longer than that. And it rained the last 3 hours of daylight. And he was the kind of kid that liked that. He knew it was hard, and he enjoyed the feeling like he was tough. And I was feeding him that, I was like, Bear, man, I think if we just sit it out, I think we got a chance at a bear. And, and he could tell that if he set it out, I was going to like that. And he was going to be tough and validated. And he bought into that. And when we sat till dark, and to this day, we talk about that because we sat so long in the dark that just waiting for a bear, just like last light, that people back at camp came to check on us because they thought surely they're going to get down. It's raining, something's happened. And boy, Bear, the guys back at camp were just, Bear, you sat there the whole time in the rain, golly, and it became probably a really pinnacle moment for him.
Yeah.
Another kid of mine, I absolutely probably wouldn't have done that. It might have ruined them. It might have just made them get back in the truck and be like, this guy, my dad, is crazy. This is the last thing I want to do. So it's tough, man. It's tough. You got to feed them just the right amount of toughness. And I think a lot of it would have to do with what you agreed upon before and how you communicated. I mean, sometimes it's like, son, we're going to go out today, and if you want to come, I want you to come. But if we go, we're going to sit till dark no matter what. If it rains, we're going to be ready. We're going to have some snacks. It's just about communication. And if they agree to it and then get out there and want to change the agreement, then you might have the leverage as a parent to be like, son, we're going to sit it out. Okay. And, this is what we planned, and we're going to stick with it. Or if you just went out and things went really bad really quick, you might just be like, hey man, let's jump in the truck and go home. I mean, your kid has to trust you that you're not going to just, put them in a really tough situation that they weren't ready for. So that it's such a complex situation, Mark. You understand? And then a lot with even what's going on individually with that kid, Yeah. It's a lot of contextual things that would make that decision.
So you're telling me there's no simple step-by-step hand guide I can look at that's going to give me all the perfect answers for every situation, Clay?
That is exactly right, Mark.
Yeah, that's why this parenting thing, I think, can't be talked about enough, because there is no one right answer. There's no clear-cut way to do any of this stuff. It all comes down to case-by-case context. It comes down to your kids and the current moment and reading the situation. And that's why I think what you said at the beginning is probably so important. Having a philosophy or a set of values for, like, having a system, right? Like, you're not going to have a rule book. There's not going to be like A, B, C, D is always going to be the way it goes. Every situation is going to be different. We're going to encounter all these different circumstances. But if we have a basic philosophy that we can lean back on, say, okay, well, I've never seen this before, but I do know that A, B, and C are really important to how I make these parenting decisions, and I will run this new circumstance through that philosophy, and that will give me the way to approach this thing, right? I mean, I think that's what we have to try to be building is building what our philosophy is, and then learning how to apply that to each new day.
Mm-hmm. Mark, I have 4 things here that I think I could say them right now and they would make sense in the context of our conversation. I've got kind of some bullet point statements about introducing kids to the outdoors. Can I run through those?
I would love to hear them.
Okay. Point number 1, and this would be on a PowerPoint if I presented it to a group of people. If you'd said, Clay, I need to hear a presentation about how to introduce kids to the outdoors. What's important? These 4 things would be on it. Number 1, the parent, the adult, has to be a whole, safe person who a kid would want to be around in general. This is like taking it way back. Like, we could be talking about sports, like how to introduce your kids to sports, how to introduce your kids to cooking, how to introduce your kids to horseback riding. And the number 1 thing is that you've got to be a person that a kid would want to be around and enjoy being around, because if you're a tyrant, if you are dismissive, if you're not engaging with these kids, and then all of a sudden you want to take them hunting and be super engaging. And I think this might be more of an example for like hunters outside of a direct family that were maybe trying to introduce a kid into hunting, not your own kid. It's just like, I mean, if your kid doesn't want to go with you to the grocery store, they're probably not going to want to go with you hunting either, So that's like a fundamental thing. Yeah. Part 2 would just be every kid's different, so you got to make it right for them. The idea that you got to be loaded with snacks and make it easy and make it simple and make it fun, and that works for some. Some, it's not the best strategy. It certainly wasn't the strategy that got me into hunting, was making it easy. Some of my kids, I've intentionally made it hard for them. I mean, Bear Newcomb, we were hunting bears over bait for years and years, and that's just the way we hunted bears. I intentionally told Bear Newcomb, because bear hunting over bait is for sure a higher probability of success than hunting out in national forest. I mean, way harder hunting in national forest. And Bear could have killed a bear over bait when he was 6 years old. And I told him, I said, son, I think you ought to kill a bear in national forest for your first bear. And so he every year watched his brothers and sisters kill bears and other people, and he could have gone and sat on a bait, and he didn't. And he finally killed one in national forest when he was 15. Like, we made it hard on purpose. But my second son, I let him kill a bear over bait when he was like 12. So make it different. And then basically the philosophy that I would have would be that I want to introduce the kids to the excitement of interacting with nature. That's what we're doing. And that would be teaching them about the woods, teaching them about the trees, the mushrooms, the grass, the barred owls, the foxes, the coyotes, the river systems, the mountains, having an understanding and interpreting that for them. I mean, a kid drives, you drive past a mountain and a kid doesn't know that that's cool. I mean, drive past the mountain and be like, look at that mountain, man.
Mm-hmm.
And that thing was formed by when tectonic plates bumped up against each other so long ago that humans don't even have record of it. And the top of that mountain, there's different animals that live up there than live at the bottom. And on the north side of that mountain, there's a whole different set of trees than is on the south side of that mountain.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild. Like just being excited about it, like interpreting for them. When you hear a barred owl, my goodness, did you hear that barred owl? And, so that's a philosophy. It's like, I want my kids to see value in interaction with nature. And then, that comes down to actually taking an animal and taking it home and eating it. But the main thing that I would say is that not every kid is going to be a hunter. And so, but what we want to do is leave every kid that we interact with with a positive impression about hunting in the natural world. So like, my oldest daughter's she's probably not going to be a big hunter, and she may never hunt again the rest of her life. But my goal with her was that when she leaves my house and she goes out into the world, she's proud that her dad is a hunter and that her family ate wild game, and that hunting is this positive thing in American culture. And that's what we can do, I think, with every kid, because they're just not going to be hunters. Like, you take 10 kids, probably about the national percentage of people that are hunters are going to be hunters. I mean, you do, and I don't know what that would be, 2 or 3 of them at most would end up having some connection to hunting. 7 of them aren't. But those 7 that aren't can at least be like, yeah, my uncle was a hunter. Yeah, that's really cool. He was a pleasant human to be around. They dealt with this thing in a competent, intelligent way. And they wouldn't describe it like that, but you understand. Mm-hmm. So the goal is, I just want my kids to have positive impressions of this lifestyle. And that's really meaningful in our broader society, as most people aren't going to be hunters. We don't need them to be hunters, but we need and want people to view hunting for what it is. It's this great platform for conserving wild places and wild animals. And it's not just this barbaric thing that is dead and dying,
Yeah.
So those are my 4 things.
Those are great, Clay. I'm curious what your take is on how to handle that last point you brought up, that being the fact that not every child will grow up to be a hunter. And you mentioned your oldest daughter as an example of that. I imagine this being a challenge as a parent, trying to read that situation, trying to decide or understand, man, is my kid just not that into it? And should I keep pushing it? Should I keep introducing it? Should I keep offering it? Should I keep trying to move the needle there? Or do I just need to accept this situation and recognize, okay, Bill or Jenny or whatever, she or he just is not, this isn't going to be their thing, and I just need to stop pounding it because that's just making it worse. What has either been your personal experience dealing with that with your daughter, or what would your advice be to someone else who might be trying to wrestle with that themselves right now? How do you understand that and deal with it?
I think a simple answer to a complex question is it goes back to those age brackets of parental influence inside of a kid's life. Your 5-year-old is not capable really of deciding whether they're going to be a lifelong hunter or not. A 16-year-old has a much more robust understanding of whether this is something that's going to be a part of their life or not. Not totally, but they've got a much better understanding than a 5-year-old. So, if your 5-year-old doesn't want to go hunting and that's a big part of your life, I would say absolutely don't give them a choice. Make them go with you. Make it fun. Do make it fun. Do accommodate them. But build it in is just, this is, well, and I think parents just give kids too much choice. Your kid was put in your family for a reason, and you and your wife get to decide the culture of your family. that's the design of the universe. And you have the right to say, this is who we are. And then as they graduate out of that, they get to make choices. So what I'm saying is, there's a time period when you do push it pretty hard, and then there's a time period when you let go. So I think just as the kid gets older, you see this is not a major thing for them. You can back off a little bit, you know.
This brings me to another one of my current questions of the topic that I'm thinking a lot about right now with my oldest son, who is just seems to be really, really into all of this stuff. Like, he's just eating it up. He's obsessed. He wants to hunt all the time. He wants to fish all the time. He wants to go with me on every hunt. He wants to see it all, do it all. He's really eating up with it. So I am wondering about and wrestling with and thinking about the appropriate way to foster that excitement and that fun that he has right now, like his love for the thing. How do I balance that with also the necessary teaching of the seriousness of this and the sacredness of life and taking a life and teaching respect for this kind of stuff? And, you know, an example of this would be, you know, a lot of young kids get a BB gun at some point. And I don't know if your childhood was like this, Clay, but I got a BB gun at one point, and I was just like a little kid that wanted to go on a tear, and I wanted to hunt every little bird I saw and every little chipmunk. And that was probably part of what, you know, helped my progression as a hunter and just having those experiences as a little kid and learning to do the thing myself. On the flip side, how do you introduce, you know, concepts of not taking more than you need or not killing something flippantly? And I'm wondering now, as my son has a BB gun, and I'm trying to think like, man, how do I make sure he's still enjoying himself, but also when do I introduce these concepts? How do I introduce these concepts without it being over his head or without it smashing the fun out of it? Because I'm like, no, you have to this. Did you experience any of that yourself, Clay? What are your thoughts on that balancing act?
You know, I think it should just be kind of intuitive how you would scale down your philosophy to the knowledge level of the child, just like you would with anything. Like when you're driving in a car and your 4-year-old's in the back seat and he says, "Dad, why are you driving like that? Why do you drive on this side of the road? Or why did you stop there?" And you're like, "Well, son, when you drive and the red light's on, you have to stop. When it's green, you go." You know, you just dumb down driving, or, you know, there's a speed limit, there's this. And I think it's the exact same way. Like, you as an adult have this pretty complex, pretty robust system of ethics and values that dictate that, yep, I will shoot a deer out of a tree stand in October, November, and December, but I won't shoot one with a rifle out of season in June. It's like, you know, that's really clear. And so you just translate it down. So when your son brings home a bird that he shot, you be like, "Wow, son, good shot. How did it happen? Where were you at?" And they'd be like, "Man, this is a beautiful bird. Look at these wings. Can you believe this? This is incredible." And, you know, when you're dealing with birds and BB guns, that's a little gray area there, but I think we all did that. And then you say, "Man, this bird, you know, we gotta find a way to." A bird's the wrong example. Let's use a game. They kill a quail, and you're like, and it's in season. You'd be like, "Oh man, this is beautiful, incredible shot, good job. Well, we're gonna eat this. We're gonna use it." Just bringing it down, and when the sacredness of life, that I think is instilled in a kid very early. And it's totally done by a parent describing that, you know, at their level, and understand that we don't take an animal's life flippantly, but also that it's very normal, you know, to eat stuff has to die.
Yeah, it's I think what you're saying resonates with me. It's all about reading your child and where they're at, speaking at their language at their level, and balancing the joy of the moment with the seriousness of it. But man, it does also sometimes seem, or at least maybe this isn't for everyone, but I constantly find myself looking back and saying, did I do that right? Am I doing this the right way? Am I screwing up my kid, or am I setting him up for success? Yeah. Was he too young to see me gut that deer? Is he old enough to understand this? And should I have him out with me when I'm doing this? Is this too soon? Is this too much? I'm constantly wrestling with those kinds of things as I'm navigating these waters for the first time, doing the best I can. But there's no report card that you get at the end of the day that says, well, you did this right. You got an A here, you got a B here, and a C there. I don't have that report card. So it's one of those things that you never quite know, and you just hope that you're doing it the right way.
Yeah. I think you just got to expose them to it. I've had somebody ask me that before, like, would you let your kids watch you gut a deer? And oh gosh, absolutely. From the very beginning, it's just like kind of I like just a common sense approach to parenting. It's that if this is something that's permissible for me to be doing, then it's okay for my kid to be introduced to it at some level, So it's like, absolutely, let him watch you gut a deer. Talk to him about the sanctity of life while you're doing it, and talk to him about food on the table. Talk to him about the life of this animal, at the level that they can understand. But the other extreme is that we just bombard them with all this philosophy that they're not ready for. I mean, sometimes you just got to let them shoot the bird,
Yeah.
And then at a later time, it's like, hey, son, we probably ought to only shoot birds that, that we need, or that we specific kind of targeting, or not, introducing some level of responsibility into the thing, and stewardship.
Yeah. So what about time away from your kids? You mentioned this a little bit, how early on when they were young, you were taking them everywhere with you. But except for certain hunts where they couldn't join you. And so this is a thing I've thought a lot about, which is, when I hear about my dad's childhood, or when I look at my childhood, I can hardly think of any hunts he was doing that I wasn't with him. Once I was, old enough to tag along. And he always talks about, man, he was with his dad all the time. I am at a situation, and you too, where I want to take my kids with me on lots and lots and lots of these experiences, but I also want to still do my own thing. I also want to be able to go on these hunts, or have to go on these different experiences where it just wouldn't be safe or possible to bring my boys along for some of these things. And so I find myself sitting out there on day 7 of a, rut hunt where I haven't seen my kids in 7 days, or where you're in Alaska on a moose hunt or something. You haven't seen your kids for 14 days or whatever. How have you thought about, over your 21 years as a father, Clay, thought about this balancing act of balancing our own personal obsession or passion for hunting and the time we spend out there by ourselves, and knowing that every time we're out there by ourselves doing this thing, we are not spending time with our kids? How have you thought about that? How have you tried to approach that balance of balancing your own personal interest and time doing this with the time with your kids?
Well, I think you've used the key word there, and that is balance. And because there's got to be a balance. Like, there's absolutely times when you're going to go hunting and your kids can't come. And that's okay. That is introduces boundaries to your kids that are going to be in every other part of their life. So I think it's okay. I think it also goes back to family architecture, which family architecture would just be like, what is the design of your family that you are using to live life successfully? And if you're a hunter and you're a serious deer hunter, and you and your wife feel like this is an important part of your life and what you're supposed to be doing, then Absolutely. I mean, there's going to be, you're going to go to Iowa and hunt for 7 days once a year. And it's just okay. And, my dad did that. And I remember some of my most exciting times of hunting was when he was gone, and I could not wait to hear how it went. That was a big part. And I don't know how that happened, but I vividly remember once Dad went to South Texas deer hunting, and the whole week I was talking to the kids at school. Man, my dad's down in Texas. He might kill the world record down there. I remember thinking that. I mean, because it's like, it's possible. Yeah. I mean, he's in Texas, and so yeah, it's balance. And you and I both know it. There are seasons of life when things are permissible and when they're not. When my kids were young, I was not in the outdoor industry, and it would not have been permissible for me to devote, just an incredible amount of time to being gone, like financially and leaving Misty with the kids. Like, there was just a time when that wasn't quite as normal as it would be today. Now their kids are older. And so I think the balance of life and with your spouse is trying to find what's the correct architecture for our family, because hunting is not really that important in the big scheme of things. You've got to find a way to balance life, and it's going to be different for everybody. I mean, we go to, I'm real involved at our church and involved in a lot of other men's lives. And it's like, I hunt more than any of them. And it's because the architecture of our family, it's like, it's my job. And even if it wasn't my job, I built my life this way on purpose. And there's other guys that maybe just hunt 1 or 2 weekends a year, and that's kind of the architecture of their life. So it's like, what's correct for you? What works? And a lot of that's determined by you and your spouse and how you decided you want to live your life, and if it's right, it'll be great for your kids. Yeah. It'll be good for your wife. It'll be good for your kids. And if it's detrimental to them, then, that's where you start making adjustments. And it might just be a seasonal adjustment of, what, I probably can't go on a 10-day hunt. I could go on a 6-day hunt during this period of time. I understand. I can't go on 3 big hunts every year. You know what? I'm just going to go on 2. And I think that's the maturity that we got to have as parents, is knowing when those times are, and when they're not, and just kind of being okay with it. And it's kind of a bummer. And it's just life. But you're really fired up when you're in your 20s, and then by the time you're in your 30s, you're competent. You have a little more money. You may have a little more time, but oftentimes in our 30s is when our kids are kind of in the heat of their development. And so it feels like parenting overlaps in conflicting ways. Sometimes our natural desire to want to go and do stuff. And you just got to find the balance,
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And I think a lot of it is just trial and error too. Like to all of this stuff, right? We don't know. We're not necessarily going to know the right answer to every one of these situations. So you try something, you try the best you can figure, and then you got to read it and assess, okay, how did this last year go? Did I have the balance right? Or was that trip with my boy, did I push it too far? Did I not push it enough? And then try again a little bit different next time, and just keep on learning. I mean, it's the same thing as becoming a better deer hunter, right? It's, you try something, you assess how it went, and then you adjust. You try something, you assess, you adjust. I think as long as you keep trying to learn and keep trying to adjust, you're going to move in the right direction. But that's a process, and it takes thoughtfulness and a sense of purpose. Like you're going into it knowing that this is a process and knowing that you're trying to learn, versus just blindly doing stuff and not thinking about it at all. Mm-hmm. There's something there. A little bit of a hard pivot, Clay, but one thing I was curious about before I let you go, is this, if I were to look at Clay Newcomb and your connection to hunting, it seems like hunting for you has been something that has connected you to the past uniquely. Like that's something that I feel like you talk about a lot. You have seemed to allow that to inform much of who you are as a hunter and otherwise. And I'm just curious if that's something that came to you by way of your family. Was that something your dad was talking to you about when you were a kid? Was he talking about, well, we're doing this and this is the kind of thing that our ancestors did, or that Daniel Boone did, or that so-and-so did? And or was that something that's naturally developed for you and you sought it out yourself? That's part one of my question. Part two is then,
let me answer part one,
okay,
Mark, because I'll get lost.
Okay.
I'll get lost because I think I've got a good answer.
All right.
I think that no, my dad would not have been interested in history. I would not have been that interested in history growing up. But I think that I kind of came into adulthood and recognized that I came out of a very cultured place. And by cultured, I mean things were done on purpose. Things were, this is the way that people thought about this. This is the way people handled that. This is what people valued. Like, and I'm talking about in the hunting space. And I became curious as to why we were the way we were. And I think I just kind of bumped into looking back at some of these guys and being like, oh, Gary Newcomb is that way because of this thing way back in American history or the history of the South. And it was real interesting to me because I think we're influenced by a whole bunch of stuff that we're unconscious of. And so, and you've heard me say it, Mark, but a great example is that, Daniel Boone introduced to the world really the idea of loving and cherishing wilderness and solitude. Before that, in the general philosophy of the world was that the wilderness is where you went to die. The wilderness, we had been trying to get away from wilderness for a gazillion years, and we came into civilization, and then this American Boone went to Kentucky and someone wrote a book, and how much of it he did was on purpose, I don't know, but he talked about solitude and love in wilderness. And all of a sudden Americans were like, yeah, we don't have big cities and beautiful 1,000-year-old architecture. What we have is wilderness. And that became a part of the American identity, was love of wilderness and solitude. And it's like, that's why we love bow hunting. That's why we have all this public land that, was like, hey, let's save some of this. That's why we have federal wilderness, is that the ideology of somebody way back, Leopold and a bunch of these guys were like, man, let's save some of this just as it was for people to go and find solitude. And I think it's interesting to just see where that connects to the past.
Mm-hmm. So then part two of my question then is, have you tried to help your children make those connections during their childhood? When you were raising bear as a hunter, were you bringing these stories up and talking about these things? If so, I'd love to hear more about that. Or if not,
you know the answer to this, Mark. All day, every day, brother. Man, living with me is like Misty and the kids. They would tell you it's like nonstop Bear Grease podcast, man. I talk at them all the time, and I'm joking and kind of making fun of myself because they make fun of me. They kind of roll their eyes sometimes, but I know they're just joking. I think so much of parenthood. I talked at my kids for years. Like if we're riding in the truck and they're not talking and they're 8 years old, and we traveled a lot, all the time. Yeah. And I would just talk to them. I mean, just tell them stuff that was way over their head, but just thinking it's going to be more developmental for them to hear their dad just talking than to just sit there or to listen to dumb country music, and that really was the philosophy that I had. I mean, I think Gary Newcomb did that to me. He really did. Dad he just would talk to me and not ask much from me at times. And I've done that with my kids. And so, yeah, they know about all this. I think we've got to interpret for our kids and show our kids what we're passionate about. And we don't have to amend that for them. Like, I don't really care if my kids think Daniel Boone is cool. I do. And I'm going to talk to them about it, and I'm going to tell them all this stuff. And I think that they may not care about Boone, but it teaches them how to be passionate and informed, and they'll take that template for their life and go out and be passionate about something, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't tell them what I think they want or need to hear. I'm trying to just be who I am and show that to them, you know?
Yeah. That resonates with me a lot. And I'm going to use you next time my wife rolls her eyes at me and bemoans the fact that I'm a constant. She calls me a tour guide whenever we go anywhere with the kids or even with other people. I'm like, well, this is this mountain and this thing happened here, and 200 years ago this thing happened, and did you know that A, B, and C? And so yeah, they feel the same way about me as it sounds like your family does about you. So I'm going to tell my wife next time, like, Clay said this was a good thing to do and that she should appreciate it, and I will say the same thing to my boys. And we'll see if that helps.
Absolutely. I'll back you 100%, Mark. So, talk their ears off, man.
I'm going to keep on keeping on. So I got one last question for you then. Given your fascination, I think would be fair to say, of the history of hunting and the American wilderness and rural America and these different things that you've dove into over the course of the years of the Bear Grease podcast and much of our other work, I'm curious if you can point to any one lesson that you have tried to share with your own children that came to you from someone in history, someone like Daniel Boone or the ancient American hunting cultures or Warner Glenn or any of these folks that you've studied over the years. Can you point to one lesson from one of them that has been important for you to pass on to your children?
Man, that is a really specific question, Mark. If I, a lot of my deep dive study of history, to be honest with you, has come in more recent years. I think that's a tough question. It's a fair question because I think I would talk to him about that kind of stuff all the time. I don't know that I've got I can't say like, well, Boone went into Kentucky and did this, and so this is why we're doing this. Like, it's not quite that direct, you know?
Sure. Well, that's fair.
I think maybe in general, Boone, probably reading Robert Morgan's book, Boone, 10 or 12 years ago. One of the most fascinating things to me was how so much of Boone, who's this American icon, was influenced by Native Americans. Boone was Boone because of his interaction and adopting and being taught the ways that Native Americans interacted with the landscape here. And so, so much of, and so I think that brought back into me a deep appreciation for Native American cultures, which I've translated that to my kids. I feel like just when we, with all the stone points we find and us just talking about it. So I don't, because my original fascination wasn't necessarily with Native Americans. It would have been more with, people like Boone or Crockett or whoever.
Yep.
So may not be exactly what you're looking for, Mark, but
Clay, I'm never looking for anything other than the thing that's on the tip of your tongue that's true to you, and you always you never disappoint. You've shared a lot of really interesting ideas here, Clay, that have helped me personally. I think there's some things here that can help me in my thinking and my practice as a father. So I thank you for that, Clay.
Hey, well, you're great. I said it the first time I was on one of your podcasts, Mark, is that you're a fantastic interviewer. You ask a lot of really insightful questions, and that's meaningful. Yeah. So,
well, thanks. I got one last question for you then on that.
Oh, you've said you had one last question like 4 times.
I know, that's one of my interviewer tricks to keep dragging you along, Clay. You write that down and try it out next time.
Yeah. No, I love it.
My last question is simply, what is there anything folks should be looking forward to? Can you preview anything that's coming down the line on the Bear Grease podcast or Brent's podcast? Anything that folks need to know about the work that you're doing that they can look forward to and that they should come and check out in the coming weeks or months?
Yeah, I don't ever do this. I would never do this on a Bear Grease feed, like tell people what I'm working on, but I'll tell you and your people, Mark.
All right.
When does this come out?
This will come out on May. So this is next week. So May 18th.
Okay, no problem. We are, I'm working on a robust series on Davy Crockett, which is it kind of seems it's funny. It's funny that you brought up what you did. We don't always do these kind of big time iconic folk heroes. One of the main our big historical series that we've done. We did one on Daniel Boone, which was maybe one of our most popular ones we ever did.
It was terrific.
But a lot of them are lesser known people, like Holt Collier, who was an African American guy that guided Teddy Roosevelt for the bear that would influence the teddy bear. That was one of the most fascinating series we ever did. Holt Collier was born a slave and ended up guiding the president on 2 bear hunts. Holt Collier, we did a series on Tecumseh, which was the Shawnee leader who was just lived an incredible life, incredible story. And then we're now doing this Crockett series, and we don't do always historic stuff. I mean, I know a lot of your people probably aren't, maybe they're not listening to Bear Grease, but we do stuff on living people. We do basically anything is on the table that is of interest to me.
I'm excited about that Crockett series. My son Everett loved your Boone series, and just this morning we had a request. We just got to our place out in Idaho, so we're sitting at the breakfast table and we're looking out over the mountains, and my son says, "Hey Dad, can we listen to the Davy Crockett song?" And so we put on the Ballad of Davy Crockett by Fess Parker. And then,
no way.
And then after that, we listened to the Daniel Boone song by Fess Parker. So it's fresh on my mind too.
Wow, that's awesome, man. That's funny. That we're going to talk a lot about that song and the Walt Disney stuff that made that famous on Crockett. Crockett's life is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I'll be looking forward to that one, and I'm sure my boys will too. So keep up the great work, Clay. You are doing world-class stuff, and I know I'm not the only one who appreciates it, but for everyone out there, I will just say one more time, thank you.
Hey, appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for the kind words.
All right, and that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for continuing on this journey as we discuss our role as parents and how we can introduce our children to this incredible wild world that we get to enjoy. As I mentioned already, make sure you're checking out everything over in the Bear Grease world, the Bear Grease Roadshow, the Bear Grease podcast, This Country Life. All that is great. Clay has a lot to offer, and we're thankful and fortunate that he's putting it out there into the world. So check it out, subscribe to his podcast, watch the YouTube videos, and until next time, my friends, thanks for being here, and stay wired to hunt.
As you know, the Meat Eater Live Tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in Meat Eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.